Howard, what's the situation you ever had that could have gotten you to a jam when you could have gotten jammed up because of a decision that you made?
It was 1980 at the Brighton. I had
No names, no names.
the hotel. I could do it. It's not even there anymore.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
The floorman, a floorman he was a good floorman for me, but he was out of the South Philly neighborhood, And the way things worked in those days, if you had a good floorman or pit boss, whatever, and they asked you to do a favor for a friend, you would. I mean, you'd give them a comp for lunch or dinner or whatever. So this floorman came to me and asked me to comp a couple of his friends, and so I did to lunch. And about 20 minutes later, I get hauled up to the DGE office, and I thought it was a joke almost. It was so radical. They sat me down, and they shined the light in my face. It was like
third degree.
Yeah. And they kept asking me about these two guys, how I knew them, why did I write them a comp, blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, I don't know them. I told him, the foreman is a good foreman, and he asked me to get a couple of guys from the neighborhood lunch, so I did. Well, turns out it was Crazy Phil Leonetti and a guy named Yogi Polino.
I remember that name.
Phil. He was Nicky Scarfo's nephew.
Yeah. And they were being followed at the time by the FBI. And I mean, followed in a way that, like the FBI, there'd be 3 agents 7 steps behind them, not trying to hide. And I said, look, I mean, I don't know who these guys are. You told me their names. I don't know who they are, but I obviously know them now. And unfortunately, the floorman wound up losing his license over it because in those days, if you were even in the same zip code as a mob guy, they would. They
blacklisted a lot of those guys back then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they had the blacklist. A whole bunch of reputed mobsters were on the list, and from Philly, from New York, from all over the place, and they couldn't come into the casinos.
You might remember from the Nugget. I don't know if I should mention his name or not, but it's so funny. Benny Eggs Mangano.
Yeah,
that was his nickname, Benny Eggs.
Yeah.
So he's playing one day, and I write him a comp, and a DGE guy comes by later. And he says, we really don't want you comping Mr. Mangano. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we prefer you didn't comp him. I said, well, then bar him from the casino. I said, but, here playing, I'm not going to tell Benny Eggs he can't have any eggs. I mean, that's your job, not my job. And, he got upset with me, but he recognized that, it's kind of hard. If you don't want a guy in the casino, then kick him out.
Howard, any like things have changed a lot since our times. Any advice that you would give somebody up and coming now on how to look at these situations? Somebody that would come into like a CEO position or GM or a COO, what advice could you give to them on how to approach any type of situation that could arise in the casino when it comes to illegalities and even how to run the operation itself? What advice would you give to them today?
Well, you got to be, like Bruce said, it's about integrity, and you either have it or you don't. And once you do something that's without integrity, then it's just the clock's ticking. You're going to be gone. So. And it's not just because of that, but it's the right thing to do. People, the larger your position, the more people will try to compromise you. They'll try to give you things. They'll try to, even if they're soft things, like, take you out to dinner, buy you wine, whatever. You got to be pretty strong with yourself not to accept those things, even though they might seem nothing more than a friend would do.
Very innocent.
They're not your friend. Basically they're trying to compromise you, and you gotta resist it. And you gotta be a little careful sometimes, depending on the situation. With, you might be dealing with some really dangerous people. So you got to think through how you're going to approach it, but you definitely don't do what they ask. I mean, I had situations where, I didn't work with the FBI, but, I reported stuff that went to the FBI over vendor issues in New Orleans. And it was a big deal. I mean,
you didn't get stitches? Snitches get stitches.
no, I mean, but I can tell you, as a result of it, the state senator, I think I mentioned this before, the state senator that was in charge of gambling regulations went to jail.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. My son was an executive host when he first got in. His first major job in the casino was a host, and he became an executive host. Not, and it wasn't juice. He got it on his own. I'm proud to say, because I pretty much people didn't even know it was my son. Well, I guess they did figure it out. His name was Bruce, also. So,
yeah, Bruce Harris, and he looked like you.
Yeah, right. But I remember he came to me one time. We were having a conversation. We pretty much didn't talk shop too much. We wanted to maintain our work-life balance and so forth. And he says, "Dad, this such and such and such," and he was sharing his story with a customer, one of his guests. He gave me 2 black chips. I said, "What?" And I freaked out, and he just didn't understand. He didn't understand. He didn't think there was nothing wrong with it at all. And I had to break it down. He said, "Well, everybody does it." I said, "Well, that's them. You can't." I said, "It's even worse that you're doing it, especially the name that you have, and then what you look like." Sometimes there's different standards, And it took a while for me to get to him to understand. I said, "Don't you ever do that again." And I trusted him, but I'm sure there was a couple times when he didn't have anything but enough money for a sandwich that he took something. It's hard to resist especially when you're broke.
Yep.
$20 or so. Howard, is there anything that you ever thought that you needed to work on? We all have things. I know that just watching these podcasts, I see a lot of things on the podcast that I always have to improve on because I cut people off and stuff like that when they're talking, and I kind of ramble a little bit. But I'm okay. I'm open with that. I'm not perfect, and that's part of my character, to be able to understand my flaws. That's part of being a musician. Us musicians, you're a musician. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Anything that you ever thought in your way that you manage or?
Yes, I was waiting for you to finish that sentence, but I'll go ahead. I'm trying to be a good better listener.
I'm getting old. I forgot what I was saying. What was I saying?
I'm not sure if this is what you were getting at, but one of the real important things for me in my career and my life that actually started the Golden Nugget. My wife had gone to one of these seminars for something that was called EST at the time, EST, which was a bit of a weird thing, but they had a good part of their philosophy, which was about creating the reality around you and creating the things you want. And basically it boiled down to setting goals. And one of the basic tenets of it is to just set the goal. I mean, you can take it further and should. I mean, they say set the goal and then put together a strategy for how you're going to get there and then take steps along that strategy. But even just if you just do the first part of setting a goal and writing it down, somehow it's like the universe makes it happen, or it can make it happen. And my personal experience was this. My wife was involved with this stuff, and she was talking to me about it. And I was going, "Oh, that sounds a bit airy-fairy. I'm not sure if I believe in that." But she convinced me. She said, "All right, what do you want at work? What do you want?" And at the time I was a pit boss, and I said, "Well, I'd like to be an assistant shift manager." And she goes, "Well, write it down." I said, I don't want to write it down. I said, "Okay, write it down." I wrote it down. And about 6 months later, and before that happened, I was giving her all kinds of reasons why I couldn't get it. I said, "Well, this guy's in front of me, and that guy's in front of me, and I don't have this, or I have that. I don't know how they." And then all of a sudden, 6 months later, boom, I'm an assistant shift manager. So then, I'm thinking, okay, that's great. And I come out of Vegas where it takes 10 years to become a pit boss if you're lucky.
But did you think that was the reason why you got it, because you wrote it down?
And yes, I didn't. The first one. Well, let me finish.
Okay.
So the then she comes back to me and she goes, okay, so what do you want now? I said, I just got this. You know, what do you want?
She's your wife.
I said, I'd like to be a shift manager. She goes, write it down. So I write it down, you know, and I'm going, that'll never happen. It's like, you know, this guy's in front of me, that's in front of me. There's only 4 positions and they don't become available that often. I don't know how long it was. It wasn't very long. 6 to 8 months, boom, I'm a shift manager.
Mm-hmm.
And she comes back to me again. She goes, what do you want?
What do you want?
Because she's going shopping every time you're getting promoted.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. But,
at that point, I would have said, wait a minute, let's bypass all this. Let's go to the top. Precedent.
Yeah. So I did. I just kept doing that. And I've done that through my career and it's worked out for me. And I don't think it's necessarily, I mean, you still have to do things. And
yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
You should sit down after you write it down and say, okay, well, in order to be a shift manager, I should have this experience and I should have that knowledge and I should, you know, make sure I get more education if I need it and, you know, take concrete steps.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe there's something to that, something out there, putting it out to the universe.
Thanks for it took me only 20 years for you to tell me that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You would have wrote down a lot of things before.
I didn't tell you before.
I'm gonna write down one hair that's not gray.
Corporate hair is very important. You know, you got a big mane of hair, which doesn't work for me very well.
Oh wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. So that was kind of the question. The question was more or less, but that was a good. I like where that went. You know, I guess I was thinking about, like, for instance, I interrupted you when you were speaking. You know, and I shouldn't have interrupted. And I always think about not doing that and listening better and stuff. You know, I thought that there might have been one of those areas that, you know, was common with yourself, because I can't be the only one out there with that situation.
I would like to mention that, actually, because it is important. I'm still working on it to this day. And I think most people can identify with it, that, you know, when somebody's talking, it's really important that you listen to them. And all you got to do is think about, when you're talking, you like to think people are listening to you, you know, and I mean, really listening, not just going, you know, like that. So I'm still working on it, but it's very important to listen. It's very important to let people finish and not interrupt. And what used to happen with me anyway, was somebody be talking, I might be interested in what they're saying, but they say something that piques a thought in my mind, and I just can't wait. I've got to say that, you know. I'm going to interrupt them, I'm going to say it.
That happens.
And it's rude, number one, and number two, it tells them, like, what you're saying is not important. Here's something important.
Yeah.
And it's not a good thing. So listening is I think it would serve you well if you think back to people that you liked and respected as leaders or mentors or whatever. They were usually good listeners. And I'll tell you, somebody who I think is a great listener is Joe Jaimo. I think Joe's a really good listener. I mean, he sits there and he listens, he thinks about what you're saying, and he comments on it. He still says what he wants to say, but, you know, he's a good listener.
I wanted to ask Howard, you know, like, we all three of us were probably like kind of on the same boat. Howard is retired. You and I, we are like semi-retired because we're still doing things. Howard, because I know the way I feel on this question that I'm going to ask you, but is there something that would bring you back? I mean, what would bring Howard Dreizter back into the game? Because we all say, okay, I'm happy, I'm not working and all that, but in the back of our mind, we are, at least I am, and I know Bruce is, if something good comes along and there is something that would pique our interest, we would say, okay, I would consider it. What would be that situation for Howard?
Well, there's a lot of qualifiers on it now, which, you know, basically I have to respect the people I'm working for or with. And it has to be more than just a job or a means to earn money at this point. I don't know if I would take a job again. It would depend. I might take a contract or something, like for a year or two. Probably more about consulting, if it's I consulted on a few projects here in Australia that interested me, and they expanded my experience with local politics and regulations, and actually international companies. And so that was interesting to me and a bit of fun. And, we did pretty well with them generally. So I think that would probably be it. I mean, unlikely that I would really want to go to work again because I like my life here. I'm living on the beach in Australia. Where am I going to go?
Oh, you put in a lot of time to get to where you're at now. And it was a lot of sacrifice.
Yeah. In fact, that's another thing. Advice I'd offer people is I would say that I was so dedicated to my work that I didn't spend enough time with my family. And they stuck with me and they understood and all of that. But I mean, I feel like I missed out on something. And I don't think all of it was necessary. I don't think I needed to work that much, that long, that many hours. A lot of it, I find, and this is an interesting thing with today's kind of working from home thing, which obviously you don't do in the casino business, but a lot of people would show up at work and it was almost like they would be going, look at me, I'm here at 7 a.m. and I'm here at 7 p.m. And look at me. But they really spend most of their day walking around chatting to other people or, killing time in different ways. Probably maybe I used to tell people, you give me 8 hours of productivity where you really hit it, and I'm fine. You don't have to work 10, 12, 14 hours. That doesn't impress me. The productivity impresses me. Increasing productivity doesn't necessarily mean, more hands per hour. It could mean other things, changing different systems that don't make people feel like, you're standing there with a whip going, keep going. But
coaching and
coaching, dealing with people, observing people. I mean, I found as not so much as a pit manager, but as a shift manager and other positions above that, I found that observing people, standing back and observing people at a distance is where you can add more value than, if you're going to micromanage them, saying, you should do it this way and you should do this that way. And micromanaging is a horrible thing. I mean,
sure it is.
I've had it done to me, and even when they're right, which they are some of the times, you don't grow from it because they're telling you, put your left foot out and shut up. Basically, they're not teaching you; they're just telling you.
It's like showing somebody how to do something on the computer. I will never grab the mouse and show you. I will say, grab the mouse. Move the cursor here, move the cursor there, move the cursor here. And that's a very simple example, but that's a very good example right there, because people normally, when somebody's showing somebody or something on the computer, the first thing they do, they'll grab the mouse to show you. Let me show you.
Right.
That's not the way you show somebody. You let them grab the mouse and you tell them what to do and what buttons to hit. Perfect example right there. So anybody listening.
Now, you're not talking about mouses like a metaphor for anything else, are you?
You got to work on that too, Howard. That's another area. That's another area to work on right there. Your humor is. Nobody's laughing. I used to have to laugh when you were paying me, so I don't have to. That was pretty funny. I just said that was funny. That was funny.
I don't think that'll make the cut.
No, that's going in. That's going in.
That's definitely. You got to be left in.
I might put that on repeat. I'm gonna
on the loop.
I'm on the loop.
Loop it.
With a laugh track.
Great. You talk about micromanaging. We have all experienced that. I've seen people who are obsessed with micromanaging, and nothing gets done unless they're involved. Right. And no idea is a good idea unless it came from them.
Who are you talking about? I asked you this the other day.
No. I've seen many.
Okay, I wanted the name.
I've seen many of those, and I don't micromanage. If I believe, first of all, when I get to a place, I identify the team. As you said, Howard, you have to identify what the quality of your team is. And if they're all qualified, by all means, let them do their work. Let them do their work. If you want to change a few procedures here and there, that's fine, but let them do their work. If I have to do your job for you, if I get somebody that is calling me and calling me and calling me all the time, at the beginning, I'm going to help you, but then I'm going to realize that, wait a minute, you can't do your job without me. That's not what I need. I need somebody who can do the job, but if you need assistance, you can come to me. So micromanaging is one of the worst things that I've seen in any industry, not only in the gaming industry, but in any industry. We should have people that we trust, qualified people that can do the job, and we should let them run with it. Otherwise, identify those. I believe you can do it, so you got to go. We'll bring somebody that can do the job, but I'm not going to be on top of everybody. And it goes, sometimes it goes way out of line that you have to, you see actually people being humiliated by the top guys in front of everybody, telling them, you don't know what you're doing. Yeah, without me, this is nothing. All of you are donkeys here. It's unbelievable. And thank God, I've seen those things and I learned from them how not to do it.
I've learned probably as much or more of what not to do from quite a few people in my career. But yeah, micromanagers, I mean, the bad thing, I don't know, it probably happens in other industries as well, but if you think back to when you, maybe not now, but in the past, I'm sure, if you were looking to promote somebody, you would say from a foreman to a pit boss, you'd say, oh, he's a good foreman, we should make him a pit boss. Well, okay, that's good that he's a good foreman, but you really need to look at the qualities that a pit boss needs and whether this person fulfills those qualities. Because unfortunately, we tend to promote people because they're good at the position they're in, and then they go to the next position, and then they turn into micromanagers because they think that's why they're in that position, because they're good at that other job. So they're going to tell everybody how to do that other job, and constantly, and just not let go.
And it's one of the worst environments you can have. I mean, because morale goes down, people
toxic.
go nuts. It's highly toxic because they're afraid now. What do I do? And they get into the situation that they will not do their job unless they make that call.
Well, they know that you judge them and you question every decision they make. So after a while, they're just not going to make decisions. As you get into senior roles, and I've been guilty of this myself. I mean, when I would look at the senior guys, I would go like, what the hell are they doing really? I mean, I'm down here in the trenches. What are they doing? But once you get up here, you realize not all of them, some of them aren't really doing anything, but most of them are very busy and they're doing different things and things that aren't visible to you. So they're not necessarily going to see them on the floor that much or see them at different things that you're used to seeing operational people at, because they're part of senior management now. They have different responsibilities. And that's why I think some people that have micromanager tendencies feel insecure in somebody's going to say, oh, they don't work anymore. So they're going to show you, they're going to go in and do your job for you. And, that's not what they're being paid for. It's bad for the person they're doing it to. It's everything we said.
I tell you, going on the floor was a break for me. That's why I would go to work, especially as a shift manager, because your job is on the floor. But we had a lot of assignments, other outside tasks, because we would volunteer to help bring a new game in or do some analysis or put a program together. And I found that I had to really do that on my own time because I couldn't come to work and be in the office working on that. I needed to be on the floor. But being on the floor was a break for me. Let me get out of this office. Let me get off this computer and get out here. And I use the term shaking hands and kissing babies, because when you're on the floor, it's really just your presence is a lot. Just to be there for your staff to know that you're there for support. And people want to be able to, you got to touch them. And you did that. I remember you on Friday or Saturday night come by, and when we worked in the showboat back in the day, that you always made it a point, you hit every pit to go through the pit. It was important, and I mentioned this on another podcast, you had to make sure you touched everybody. Otherwise, you're building a perception of favoritism. People would think that, how come he's not over here talking to me? How come he's talking to that person? Oh, that must be a favorite up there, and then that's not good for morale and things too.
Yeah, you don't have to talk necessarily to everybody, but you have to talk to a lot of people, that's for sure. Because you're right. I mean, if you tend to go to a couple of people, then they view it as favoritism, even if you're not doing anything for them. It's just a bad thing. But like you said, I mean, especially in my last job, I mean, the corporate responsibilities were so heavy that I used to love going on the floor. I mean, I used to spend a lot of time on the floor down there in Hollywood because I could breathe down there.
The real world.
Yeah, to me anyway. Corporate life was not necessarily my favorite.
You didn't enjoy that? Did you and Jim Allen work closely together? Look at your body language. Your body, I saw that.
trying to think how to be diplomatic here. I
can change the name.
No.
Okay.
The politics in that level of management are fierce. And when I say fierce, I mean, there's some real nasty things that happen up there. Unnecessarily, not productive, just people trying to, what are you doing with your mouth there?
You can't see it. Nobody sees it but you. Now you called me out.
Oh.
Okay.
I didn't know what you were doing.
My mustache was tickling my mustache was tickling my lips. So it's none of your business, actually. So
well, it's right in my face. It is.
Right. Okay. All right. Why did you interrupt you? You interrupted yourself. That's not good.
I did. Anyway, it was. There's some real backstabbing people, probably in any corporate structure, and people trying to make themselves look better to gain favor or to get the next promotion to the next role. Yeah, it's just I really prefer the floor. I think if I had to guess at my favorite job overall was probably shift manager. I had a great time in Tampa. But can I turn to something else for a second? You work with those guys, Steve Hyde and Mark Edis, and those guys that worked in the Trump era, and they lost their life in the tragic helicopter crash in Atlantic City on the Garden State Parkway. Tell us a story about this. Yeah, well, actually was good friends with all of them, but particularly with John Benenav and Steve Hyde. When that accident happened, I mean, the whole company went into disarray. We were all walking around like zombies, and you really get to see a side of people that is great and sometimes not so great. I know that probably 2 weeks after the accident, I was at a function at Trump Castle, and they had just had their first $30 million month, which was a big deal back then. And Trump comes walking up with the manager at the time, the president of the property. The president of the property had only been there a month, and Trump was just praising him and saying what a great job he's doing and all that. And one of the people sitting at the table with me was Steve Hyde's executive assistant, very nice lady. And she got upset by what he said. And she said, well, Mr. Trump, don't you think that this is due to, the foundation that was laid by the team that you no longer have? And Trump just went, I don't know about those guys,
Wow.
at the time. And at the time I was actually it was when I was debating whether to take the job at Showboat, and my wife looked at me and she goes, well, did you make up your mind? I said, yeah, I'm out of there.
Oh, wow.
I left after that.
Yeah, I don't know. I just saw something funny. I just saw, it was a documentary just yesterday, and it mentioned that, something similar to that. And I guess it was a gentleman, he was the president or something of Trump's Plaza. Was it O'Connell or something like that?
Yeah, Jack O'Donnell.
O'Donnell.
Jack
Yeah.
O'Donnell.
he made the statement that, that right after the funeral, that, Trump was being interviewed, and he said, I was supposed to, it was terrible. I was supposed to be on that flight, and O'Donnell says it was crazy. No way was he supposed to be on that flight. He just actually lied just to make himself the story, because why would he be on the flight? He had his own helicopter, you know what I mean? So that was interesting. I didn't know who they were, but all I know, when it happened, the three names, Marquettes and, Steve Hyde and
John
Benioff, yes. And they named the arena, didn't they? Marquettes Arena?
Margieta's Arena, yeah. I knew Steve because when we work at the Nugget, he used to come down on the casino floor and always say hello. He was the top guy then.
He was a nice guy.
And yes, and Marquettes. Steve was a big guy like Howard. Like if you looked at him from the beginning, you were like, like apprehensive. Is he a nice guy, or is this a tough guy? Because he was the president of the property. But once he came down and said hello, hey, how you doing? Immediately you knew that he was a very nice guy. Same with Mark. Mark is I remember, Howard, I think you were in this trip when we went. Steve Wynn used to do those fun nights in Maryland. Mm-hmm. And we went to one. You were there. I'm almost sure that you were.
Tour de Trump. The Tour de Trump. Oh, you saying Steve Wynn?
Steve Wynn, yeah. We used to do the fun. He used to do once a year the fun nights in Rockville, in Maryland. And I went to one. I think you were there, and that's where I knew who Marquettes was, because I have seen him. But that's when I first spoke with him and got close to him. We were at the hotel that night after we finished, and we were partying. There was a place, there was a disco there, and I was dancing, and he was right behind me. I didn't know he was behind me. And all of a sudden I said, man, you can dance. And after that, he used to call me Dancing Miguel. Dancing Miguel. He used to go by. He said, there he is, Dancing Miguel. They were wonderful people. I didn't know John, but the other two I did.
What were they good at? What was their thing? What made them so valuable? What was their strength?
Steve was a master at senior level organizational drive and purpose and direction. He was very good at that, and he also was able to handle Donald, and he was able to handle difficult customers. I mean, he was a very religious guy. He was a Mormon. He was very religious, mm-hmm. But he would sit there and he would listen to things I'm sure he hated, but he dealt with it, and he was very even-handed in everything he did. Mark was a really good marketer. Not so much on the player development sort of thing, but more on the event thing. He's the one that mm-hmm. really got the boxing going with Tyson and all of that. He promoted boxing heavily. He brought in different and big shows. That was his thing. And John was, he was a young guy, Cornell graduate, real up and comer in hotel, food and beverage. John and I used to spend a lot of time together. He was always picking my brain because he wanted to learn more about the casino, and I wanted to learn more about hotel and food and beverage. So we enjoyed each other's company. But they were a very formidable management team. And wow. Steve, I worked with Steve originally at the Sands. I think he was at Caesars before that, and then he came to the Sands. And when I left the Sands, he told me, he said, you'll be back here. You'll be working for me again. I didn't see him again until he came to the Nugget. And I sort of laughed and I looked at him. I said, well, I am working for you again, but I'm not at the Sands.
Mm. Should have wrote it down. Right. Howard, remember we had Omar Sharif in at the Showboat? And he was Omar was the lead role in Dr.
Zhivago, he was in it.
Yeah, Dr. Zhivago, and he was like a ladies man.
In a Western also called McKenna's Gold.
Yeah.
Back in the 60s.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was saying, I remember he came in, he was so dapper and elegant, and we had that reception. When everybody was there, I think your wife came all of a sudden. I had never seen her in the casino. And all of a sudden, she showed up like at 10 o'clock at night or something.
No, it was funny. Let me tell you that. I was going to dinner with him. I went to dinner with him and with Kel that night, and I knew she was a big fan, and he was a big star, and particularly in those days. And I called up Lana and I said, "Why don't you come in and have dinner tonight?" And she goes, "I don't really want to do that." I said, "Well, I'm having dinner with Omar Sharif." She goes, "I'll be right there."
She was looking pretty too.
Yeah. So then we get in, we're sitting down, and it was like I was invisible. And I got to say, he was a really charming guy. He was just magnetic kind of guy.
The first 2 days, Howard, the first 1 or 2 days.
Yeah, I know what happened. I got the phone calls. But at dinner, he was telling great stories, and he was so charismatic. And my wife was just sitting there swooning on him, like I could have left. Wouldn't even have known it.
But Omar had this dapper suit on. Kasia, picture this, Kasia. His dapper, white shirt, red tie, navy blue, elegant suit, whatever. Yeah. Day 1 at the craps table. Day 2, same suit, same shirt, same tie. I think he slept in it, but was still looking good. But day 3 and 4, no shaving, the suit's tattered, the collar's getting a little off-colored now. Put 2 words together and I'm saying, fuck. If I had one of these, if I had my iPhone back then, oh man, I would have got like a couple of million views.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he was a cool guy.
They were lucky. They were lucky back in those days that they weren't those cell phones that you could take video or pictures. Imagine what would have happened. I mean, all the things we saw in those casinos that we worked back then, and especially people of high prominence like Sinatra, Dean Martin, stuff like that. Remember the time that
you guys were
Sinatra,
there?
Yeah, we were there. Actually, I was in the same pit.
Yeah.
Howard, you were there too?
Back.
I was there, and in fact, it was funny because the surveillance tape of that incident wound up on TV the same night. And I remember going up to the Rangoon Saloon, and a couple of the shift managers were up there. I think Alan Anderson and
Rob Barnum. Rob
Barnum, yeah.
He passed away recently.
Yeah,
Did you know that? Yeah.
And I went up there and I said, "So what's going on with this deal?" And they said, "Oh, you got to be quiet. Nobody, we're trying to keep it quiet." I goes, "It's on TV." They were stunned. They didn't know it was on the news already. Sinatra, I don't remember verbatim, but I know Sinatra said, "I want you to deal 1 deck out of your hand." And
out of the hand.
They didn't have that. And I don't even think they knew how to do it. And he said, "If you don't do it, we're not going on stage tonight." And they got intimidated into doing it. And the state got mad at they wound up, the dealer lost their license, and people got
dealer,
suspended.
Supervisor, they all got suspended. It was the dealer, the supervisor, the pit boss, and the shift manager. They got suspended. They got suspended for 2 weeks. Sinatra said that he was going to pay their salary for those 2 weeks. He never did.
No. And then Sinatra got banned. Remember, he got banned from Atlantic City for like 2 years.
Yeah. Because of that, the gaming division, they banned him for a couple of years for that.
They were tough.
Yeah.
They were tough.
Now you mentioned Kel Hazels. You mentioned Kel. Kel Hazels was he the owner? His family owned Showboat, Howard?
It's an interesting story. His family were, they weren't the majority owners, but they were significant owners of Showboat. And his father, I always get it screwed up, it's either Kel Hazels Jr. or Senior or whatever. His father was actually running the Tropicana when Tony Spilotro was there. And Tony Spilotro is, that movie Casino. The Joe Pesci character is Tony Spilotro. And Kel's father was supposed to, one of his main jobs was to get Tony Spilotro out of the casino, which is kind of hard. And but he ultimately did it. And Kel, Kel didn't have a lot of experience in the business, and
he didn't even look like he belonged in the business. He looked like, he reminded me of Opie Taylor, whatever, He
was like a preppy guy, a preppy out of
happy-go-lucky.
But he was a smart guy. He was
Well,
a Yale graduate, and really Showboat was where, for me personally, I mean, I was always sort of table games prejudiced. It was like slots, table games, and that's where I really started to understand the way slots worked and margins and profitability and space allocation and all of that. And we really did well there. I mean, we had huge. When I got there, I think I don't remember the EBITDA, but it was like, I think it was 30 million or something, and we went well over 100.
Howard, could you briefly explain that, what you just said about space allocations and margins, and the EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxation, and amortization? Just briefly give an idea, because I don't even think I even understand that myself.
Well, in those days,